And welcome everybody. It's Jeff from Home Renovision, and you are live. We're filming from Lake County, Florida, my trailer project. I know you've been not seeing those videos for a little while, but that's okay. There's a ton more coming. We got a huge tub conversion project coming up. Finish watching the shed series. It's going to be a lot of fun. We are in the middle of a major thunderstorm where I am. Just wanted to give everybody a clear warning. Tornadoes have passed north of me. We're going to be just fine. It's really deafening in the room where I am, but the mic doesn't pick up the rain for whatever reason. But today we're talking about framing. I built a little wall here in my studio because just about anybody can build a wall. And we're going to walk through that in a minute. But we're going to talk about what does it mean to build 16-inch on center? What about fire blocking? Because some of you have zones where your building code requires it. What about the corners? How do I do an outside corner, inside corners? How do I frame that properly? How do I join a wall in the middle? Right, so you've got, let's say you're doing a basement. Lots of people doing their basements. You frame the whole outside of the basement so you can have your thermal barrier systems put in place. But then what about your partition walls? How do you tie into the existing wall? Great question. I'm going to show you how to do that. In your framing, save you a ton of time and money. And what about for people who are making modifications to the main floor? You want to change the structure. You want to make your patio door wider, right? Or you're going to do some different things. You're going to put in a beam. You're going to open up your living space, how to build a temporary wall. What does a point load look like in a frame construction so that you don't accidentally cut it out by accident? We're going to talk a little bit about structural engineering today and load-bearing walls. We're going to deal with all of that in this video. Because if you can understand all of these basics as a DIYer, then you can go from just putting sticks together and then trying to drywall it and nothing works to being very proficient, having a system where when you can go down to your basement and you can start in one corner, do the entire basement, get back to the other end. I almost fell over, my God. And you know what? You're going to be able to go straight into drywall as soon as you pass your inspections, okay? And you're not going to be, every time you put a sheet of drywall up, oh, I have to stop. There's no wood. I don't have backing to screw to. It drives you crazy as a homeowner. So, this is going to be the next few weeks as a real let's call it a remodeling series, okay? We're going to deal with framing. We're going to deal with drywall. Next week on Tuesday, mostly drywall. How to install it, all the problems you run into, how to fix all of the damages and the mistakes, the processes, different options for outside corners. Lots of products on the market. We're going to tackle them all right here on this display. And then after that, we're going to jump into another paint comparison. We did one of those a little while back with the Home Depot. Now I'm putting up Home Depot versus Lowe's. Okay, it's coming up in a few weeks. I am going to be out of town for 1 week. I'm going to be at a trade show in Chicago, so we're going to miss that. But when I get back, we're going to do that live show. We're going to compare Home Depot paints versus Lowe's paints, okay? And we're going to have a lot of fun with that. And I picked some really ugly colors just so that we can have a good time. And then after that, the last week before I head back to Ottawa, because we have a brand new year, we are just getting started here on this channel, guys. Before we head back, we are going to do a load-bearing test on all the different drywall plugs and hanging accessories that are out in the market today. We're going to do some live testing right here on this wall. We're going to have two cameras. We can watch how it looks on the back end versus the front end. There's a lot of really neat gizmos out there. We want to tackle all that, okay? I'm so excited about 2024. I got a great team. We're going to have a brand new studio. We've got a brand new project I can't talk about yet. Not released by the boss. My daughter runs my show. Anyway, let's just jump in. Let's talk about some framing. We're going to take questions as we go. I got Eric back in Ottawa. He's managing things tonight. He's going to put questions on my screen. I've got a couple of different cameras so we can zoom in and get some really good action for you. I got a ton of tips and tricks to help you out. I see a bunch of our members in the chat. Guys, thanks, members, for everybody who joins the membership. If you're not a member yet, be one. January the 13th, checking my notes, yes. The next live show for members only, Saturday, January 13th at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to give you 2 or 3 hours of my time, answer all your questions. It's great because here we get the value of membership exponential, right? You can ask me a question. I can ask you a question. You can answer it back. And we can kind of dive in together, right? Now we can have a conversation in the chat, solve your problems, get you exactly the information that you need so you can move forward, be successful with your renovation. Because at the end of the day, our goal is to help you get your job done like a pro. So it maximizes your return on investment. If it looks like you did it yourself, you don't get your money back. But if it looks like a pro did it, baby, you can make 3 to 4 times your investment on every project you put in your home. And that's what we're here for. Love all of you. Okay, we're going to just jump in. Let's just start with the first thing. 16-inch on center. Now, that just happened live. All right. Can't even hold on to a tape measure around here. Here we go. I got a spare. 16-inch on center. For everybody who wants to know, my tape measure looks like this. Okay, there's the start. And then right there next to this hand, there's a little red square. And that says 16 inches. Okay, buy a tape like that because it makes measuring easy. When you're framing your wall, you can start and you can mark everywhere where there's a red square. Okay, 16, 32, the 48, the red square is just underneath of it. Boom, 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 all the way across. You take 2 pieces of lumber, you mark the top and the bottom plate, okay? You put an X to the side of it, and then you can put all your studs so they're spaced properly. That's important for the following reasons. Because you can do 16, you can do 24, especially with basements. If it's structural, if it's the exterior walls of a house, it's got to be 16, but in a basement, you can go 24. But if you're going to do it, use the 5/8 drywall, because regular 1/2-inch drywall, when you go that wide of a spacing trying to save money, ends up cracking and it's too weak, okay? So go to 5/8 drywall. So you're going to spend money one place or another. You might as well just stick with the 16s, okay? Here's the deal. A 2x4 is really not up to code for modern day insulation in a basement. It is up to code for framing, because really what it's designed to do is provide a place to run your electricity, mount your boxes, okay? So basement-wise, we like to put rigid foam in behind so that the R13 insulation that goes in between the stud thickness meets with the rigid foam, meets the same R20 standard as the main floor. That's the new code. That's what we're doing. If your house has got 2x4s above, okay, on the main floor and second floor, you can use 2x4 only in the basement. Not really recommended. Those are usually older houses and they benefit from a better system in the basement. That's another video. But it's a 2x4. So 1 nail for every 2 inches of lumber. So you attach 2 nails or 2 screws at the top, 2 nails or 2 screws in the bottom. The question about nails or screws comes into play here. Jeff, do I have to use nails or can I use screws? I don't have a $400 nail gun. Yes, you can use screws. Interior walls are non-load bearing. Anything in your basement is non-load bearing. You can put all those walls together with screws, save yourself a ton of money on tools, okay? That is great to know. Now, what we're going to deal with here is we have a 16-foot on center wall. Let me put my drill down for a second. I want to show you a trick when you're all done framing your walls. You run around with a 4 or a 5 or a 6-foot level. Even if it's a $10 piece of junk plastic like this, which I picked up, all right? You start on one side and you slide it along. I just hit a stud. Okay. Let's start from this side. I hit a stud. Inevitably, the lumber that you buy from the store is not going to be all straight. Do not spend all day long sorting through the lumber to find straight wood. Here's the deal. As soon as you pull that lumber out of the pile, it starts to twist and warp. The minute. Like the very second. So as soon as you pull it out and you're eyeballing it, you're in the middle of the Home Depot going, oh, that's a nice piece of wood. You stick it on your truck. You're bouncing around on the way home. You get home, you take it out, you bring it to the basement, you load it up. Right? Later that day or the next day you start to frame it, it's all twisted. Don't worry about it. Just get the damn lumber. Load it in the truck. What you need to know is how to fix it on site so it ends up straight and level and plumb. That's what we're going to do today. Here's my system. This is my stud that's all screwed up, okay? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to recommend you take your saw, you set the blade depth to 1 1/4, because the stud is 1 1/2 inches. Whoop, did I just set that wrong? Yes, I did. Not 1 1/4. Here we go. Let's take the battery out so we don't have an accident. We're going to set our table. Okay, really simple. It's a 3 1/2 inch stud. We're going to go here. That is 2 1/2. That is perfect. Put our battery back in. All right, and you're going to hold here. You're going to cut here, and you're going to get your butt down so that you can see what you're doing. You're going to cut right through it. Now, if you do that and you push it, you should be able to straighten it out of the way. Okay? It's like a Pac-Man. It's like a mouth. Let me just go over here. We're going to use the other camera for this. So you should be able to push this closed. All right? So what we do in the world of construction is we take a piece of strapping, all right, and we load it up. We use a 1x3 because it always works. When things are crooked, you use a 1x3. Okay? You want to get a 4-foot piece. Don't try to be cheap here. Put your screws as far apart as humanly possible. Okay? Now here's what we do. We're going to get that piece in. Here's my cut. Now I'm going to push until it's closed. I'm going to get that screw in there, and then I'm going to finish it off with another one. That is a scab. Okay? If it's warped really badly, grab your reciprocator, cut it right through till about a 1/4 inch from the back. Okay? And then you'll get that done. That is how we scab our framing. We're always trying to make sure that things aren't, that's perfect, right? There we go. Loving that. There are people out there on the internet, guys, that are telling us that we should get out an electric planer and that you can just plane the front of the stud back till it's perfect. You don't have to be that nuts, okay? That is for really extreme situations where perfection is necessary and whoever's judging the job is absolutely ridiculous. In the world of construction, you're going to see this time and time again. The standard practice is to cut and splinter, okay? Just like a broken leg. You want to splint. Let's get to this question. Your plane's advice, maybe just use my power planer to take off the humps, right? That's an option. But you see, the problem with using the planer is now you don't have a 2x4 anymore, and it's not a big deal. But if the whole wall is warped and you're planing every single stud, that's a long day at the office, right? Like, my goodness. Now, let's deal with one more question. Fire blocking. I've had this question 1,000 times on my channel. People have asked me, Jeff, how do we put in fire blocking? What's the point? Do I have to use it? Blah, blah, blah. Fire blocking, 16-inch on center. The thickness of the wood is 1.5 inches. Okay? 14.5 inches. You can cut them in advance. Take your hammer. It'll never fit the first time. Tap them in. Okay? Now, the reason we have fire blocking is because we have receptacles. And the plugs usually run down along the bottom of the wall. And back in the old days, we didn't have arc fault circuit breakers. We didn't have anything like that, fancy schmancy, right? And so if you started a fire in the box would continue to burn, and it would run up the cavity, potentially, and then extend your fire. This had better be important. Nope. Sorry, guys, but because of the tornado warnings, I left my phone on in case I got notified. That was just my son, Nate, giving me a call. And he's going to be in trouble for knowing not to call me on a Tuesday night. Listen, the fire blocking is really simple. What it does is it isolates that wall cavity. Because when a fire burns, it eats oxygen. And if you put in blocking, it has no more opportunity to get oxygen. All right? Now, there's a couple of different ways to put fire blocking in. One of them is with screws. Okay? And it's really nice. You can just line this up. And then get that back to level again. I love using screws in scenarios like that. Those little impact drivers are really, really handy dandy, right? The other one is nails. All right. This is a 3-inch nail. It's a common nail. Let me show you. There you go. Pretty darn simple, right? It's got a head and a shaft. You just hold it up against your wood. That's it. Now, the idea behind fire blocking is you put one up, one down, one up, and one down, so you have access to the fasteners. That's it. If you have it in your building code, you're going to want to add it. If you don't, personally, I don't see the need anymore because electrical code requires us to use arc fault circuit breakers. So now even if a mouse is in your wall and eats the wire, even the mouse doesn't blow up and catch on fire. So there's really not the same risk as there used to be in the old days. I've been in scenarios rebuilding houses that have had interior wall fires that were balloon construction from 1905. And even in that situation, the wall didn't have insulation. The the floor between the first and second floor, the joist cavity, didn't have anything in it. It was open space to a semi-detached next to it, no firewall. The second floor wall didn't have insulation, and then there's a 2-foot crawl space on a flat roof. Even with all that oxygen, the fire snuffed itself out from the smoke behind the framing before it got through the lath and plaster. So it's really, in my world, not a real big issue anymore, especially with the introduction of our arc fault breakers. So if you're updating your electrical, I don't see an issue, okay? The only time you've got to use nails, great question, Kush, if you're doing structural framing, you got to use nails. Caveat that with saying there are situations where you can use structural screws, but it has to have a stamp on it with a code on the head, okay? If you're doing interior walls that aren't carrying any load, you can use screws all day long. I recommend that for DIYers because if you make a mistake, you can back out the screw and fix it without having to cut everything through and cut through all the nails, and it can be really maddening. All right, now let's deal with corners. Corners are simple. Here's the end of my wall, here's the corner. And I shape it like an L for a reason. Do I have? Yes, I have. I've actually somewhat prepared for today. Here represents the next piece of lumber. Okay? This will be the next wall. Check this out. Okay? You can see that black line. Or let's do it over on this side. We can go on the other camera. Yeah. Okay, there we go. You can see that, right? This black line on camera 2, the black line represents where the wood stops. That becomes a nail surface, okay, for backing. All right, now watch this. Watch this, guys. This piece is attached to the top and bottom. You've got to make sure that it's flush. You can't have it sticking out. Now, for all the ladies out there, I'm going to recommend you buy some of these clamps because clamps have the marvelous ability to push everything flush, okay? This is great if you're working alone too. And then you can come along and drive your screw in. Nice and tight. Then you can put the clamp away and save it for another day. Every time you're doing a project, you have to force wood into position. If you have a clamp, you've got the ability to force it in position, hold it there while you screw it. Definitely worth the investment. Consider that. All right, corners are really simple. You want an L. Everywhere you have an L, if the wood wants to warp, it's attached to the other piece of wood in its opposite direction. Okay, so this L creates an incredible amount of strength. A stud standing by itself is okay, but a stud with an L is 10 times stronger against the warping. And so what that does for you when you put an L together is that's where you want to build your other wall off of. That keeps your corners from moving around and cracking and splitting up over time. So when you do your drywall work, you have a fantastic result long term. Put a screw every 16 inches. When in doubt, when you're framing, every 16 inches you put a stud, every 16 inches you put a screw, every 16 inches you put a nail, whatever the fasteners you're using. That's the rule, okay? 16. What if we want to join a wall in the middle? All right, so we framed our whole basement. I'm going to make a bathroom. I want a bathroom to come right here. What do I do, Jeff? How do I attach a bathroom wall to this wall? Because if you just bring the wall over and you don't have anything to screw it to, they're moving independently during expansion contraction. Remember, basement walls are thermal breaks, so they have different temperatures affecting the backside. Things will move around. So here's the solution. What you want to do, whenever you're going to be building a wall in a basement, is you grab a 2x6. Okay? And it's also not going to want to go into where it wants to go. Let's go to camera 2 here, Eric. Okay. 2x6 is a solution here. Every time we tap it in, make sure it's flush, top and bottom. Now, you will see, if it's a perfect location, you can use a 2x4. If you've measured it out and marked it out and added the extra stud, you can make an L out of 2x4 anywhere. But what this does is this gives you a lot of mercy. Again, you tie them together every 16 inches. Okay? That way, you've got backing for your drywall. All right? The only other thing you can do is you can take a 2x4, you can cut it into 14.5 inches like a fire blocking, and instead of going horizontal, you can go vertical with your fire blocking. 1, 2, 3 locations. All right? So you can attach your 2x4 stud or 2x6 in the middle of a cavity. This wall would come over. Let's do it this way. Let's say your wall's here. Okay? You could have a blocking behind 1, 2, and 3 locations. You can screw top and bottom, and plus the 3 blocking locations. That is enough to keep things from moving around so you don't get cracks. All right? Okay. Hoy. Now, that's it for building walls. That's the basics, right? There's lots of other nuances out there. The reason I like to do all of my corners with 2x4s is structure, is substance. I don't like to do strapping as a backer very often. I like to keep it all nice and strong. Let's answer a couple of questions about how to build a wall if you've got any. We'll jump into those real quick, because in a second we're going to get into all the structural stuff. Building temporary walls, point loads, load-bearing walls, all that kind of jazz, right? Oh, all righty. Oh, we're only 22 minutes in. We've got a few minutes here for some questions. I got to get myself a beverage. Here we go. And I'm back. How we doing, Eric? We got a good question here we can deal with. Joe wants to know, what is the maximum stud-to-stud fluctuation that you can allow for on a wall to maintain flush? How much bending should the drywall tolerate without cracking when it's screwed down? That's really an interesting question. So the assumption is that it's continue to move over time. Once you get your fasteners in, it stops moving almost always, okay? The secret is you got 3.5 inches of space. Get your fasteners as close to the edge, about 1/2 inch from each edge. If you put them paired together too much in the middle, it'll still twist as a stud, okay? So it'll cause you issue. Generally, bowing happens during the drying process. So it'll be bowed in the package, it'll be bowed on the truck, it'll be bowed when you pick it up. And it's bowed. It's not going to continue to get worse. All right, so that's kind of it. The reason I don't like to sort through all the lumber is it's a huge waste of time. That only takes a minute. I picked up 20 pieces of lumber today. I only had one that had a bow. I threw it in the wall on purpose, just so you guys will know it's not that big of an issue. All right. Here we go. JH, how can you tell if a wall is load-bearing if you're doing a remodel? We're going to get into all the load-bearing questions in just a minute, JH. But generally speaking, there is no simple rule because there's all kinds of load. So we're going to talk about that in more depth in just a minute. So hang around, and we'll get to that soon. How do we run an electrical line into a wall from the top plate? That's a good question. Well, generally speaking, in order to run an electrical line, did I throw that in here? Yeah, I did. All right. You just take your drill. All right. Here we go. 101. You lift this section here, pop the old ones out, and you can drop in one of these. Now this is a really big, this is a 1 inch, okay? This is a Diablo, self-driven. You see the threads on there? All right, that's self-driven, and then the points on the end really drill well. And I'm probably too short to get all the way up there. I'm trying to do a demonstration, and I'm too short to get there. Let me try the bit extension. We'll see if we can get lucky. All right, and then you over here, and you try to get close to the stud, but you drill through the middle. Because when the wire comes through the top plate, you want to be able to staple it to the sides, right? And that's how you drill through the plate. All right? Piece of cake. Now, all right, here we go. Load-bearing wall using a pocket door. Yeah, you've got to put in a beam, okay? We'll deal with all that in a minute. Listen, if you're going to do a load-bearing wall and you want to put a pocket door, that's fine. But your wall has to not be load-bearing anymore. You need to put in a beam. So you go from load-bearing, which is every stud is carrying load, to point load, where you have a stack of 2x4s at one end, a stack at the other, and then a beam that goes all the way across. So nothing else underneath it has got any weight on it, okay? That's how we make things. All right, MB wants to know, when working solo, would it be advisable to frame the wall on the ground and nail off a shear panel to square it up before standing it, or standing up bare, then plumb through it before sheathing? Okay, so you're talking about building a house, right? I don't think it's advisable to build a house on your own, period. You want a helper. But the truth of it is, if you build in small enough sections, you can put the sheathing on as well and then lift it into place, right? I would actually just put a couple of 4-foot arms on the side with one screw, lift it up to my hips where they would engage, all right? And then get underneath it like this and then lift, okay? Just make it a 2-stage lift and throw in a couple of temporary arms, you'll be fine. And are there pump jacks worth a hoot that aren't super expensive to help stand a wall so low that's sheathed? That's the thing, it's not a pump jack. Okay, if you build your wall and you have halfway through, you've got a 2x4 that's 4 feet tall on a single screw going behind it. When you lift it up, those 2x4s swing out like this. Okay, they swing out. So you can, if your hips are at 3 feet, then make 3-foot blocks, 3 feet from the ground, and put a single screw. Lift it to here. Then the weight can be on that block, and then you can get underneath it, and then you can lift like this. It's like snap and jerk, really is what it is. All right? All righty. Yeah, Sean wants to know, I'm still in Florida, Sean. We're going back to Ottawa in early March. We're just getting the rest of this trailer deal figured out. Now let's get on with this, because that was some good demonstration. Is this helpful? Anybody? Are you learning anything at all? Hopefully you are. Let's assume for a minute, I know there's a lot of lumber in this wall, but let's assume for a minute that you have this great idea and you want to make your 5-foot patio door a 6-foot patio door. And outside walls, in a lot of cases, are load bearing, okay? And what do we do with that? The way we deal with that is the structural engineer will come by and he'll say, you need to build a temporary wall. Now, we have this rule in construction called cantilever, and we can cantilever weight, all right, 2 feet. Here's the deal. Now, I'm going to just preface all of this by saying I'm not giving structural engineering advice today. You need a structural engineer if you're going to get your project. But if this is the outside of your house, okay, and there's the roof, okay, all of this truss and all that roof is load right here, all right? And if you want to interrupt that, and because your plan is to make this wall that goes like this, okay, you have a door, let's say, and you want to make it wider, you're changing that load that's coming down those studs, all right? What you do is you measure back 2 feet, 2 feet, okay, from that wall, and you build another interior wall that picks up this truss on along here, and you transfer all that down. Underneath here, you're going to have all of your floor joists running that direction as well. All right? And so your structural engineer will be able to help you with that. That's called cantilever. All right? And the way you do that is really simple. You take a 2x4 and you put it on the floor. Okay? You identify where your trusses are. You take a 2x4, you go across the ceiling. You screw it to your trusses. And then you have a space left over. And you've got to cut your 2x4s exactly the same as that space. And might I say, plus a 16th, maybe even an 1/8. And the way you do that is on your tape measure, it'll tell you how wide the tape is. Or you take a second tape measure and you measure the width of your tape like that, okay? And then what you do is you take your measurement all the way up to your top plate, you read the number, okay? So you hit the top plate, you read the number showing right there, and then you add the width of your tape to that number, and you cut one stud at a time, hammer it in place, and screw it in place top and bottom, front and back, 4 screws. Don't mess around with this. The most common problem I see with structural walls is the same problem that happens when you build a house without your OSB on the side. And that's the shear, right? It can all twist. So what I recommend is you take a 2x4. There we go. Now, for this, I'm going to go to the second camera, and I'm going to set that right here. There we are. That'll work. Okay, we're going to want to take a 2x4, and we want to do something really interesting here. All right. We want to brace the back of our wall. Okay, about 4 feet in the air. So don't be afraid to really get in there. Okay, and you want to put 2 screws. Because when you go to 2 screws, this cannot move like this if there's 2 screws in every stud location. You can also use nails if you have an impact nailer, air tool, battery tool, I don't care. Lots of nails, lots of screws. 1/2 inch to 1 inch from the edge is fine. Once you've stacked all that on, now this wall, it won't move independently left or right. Okay? Whew. Let's get back to main camera, Eric. There we go. Once you've got all that put on, your wall will not move left or right, which means you're not just carrying load, you're resisting the temptation for the house to go like this. Okay? You knock out the beam and it goes, ugh, and it starts to sag to the left or the right. You don't want to let that happen, okay? On a home, every wall is somewhat structural on the outside. And if it's not structural, it helps keep things straight without twisting. Temporary walls should have a temporary brace across the middle. Okay? Always, always, always do that. Use screws. It's temporary. It has a lot more strength than you think. Okay? You'll be just fine. Now, let me go back to my notes. Point load. Yeah, listen, if we don't get to your question today, and we're going to answer lots of questions afterwards, okay? Feel free, throw them in the comment section of the video. It'll go live just after the live show, and I'm going to go home tonight. I'm going to spend some time, and I'll answer all those questions for you guys. Here's the thing. Here's another common situation. I've got my lumber stored back here, but we're going to just deal with the front camera here, guys. Here we go. If a couple of different scenarios for load, okay? There we go. How many of you guys have run along, opened up a wall, and seen a triple like this before? Okay? I'm just going to throw a couple screws so it doesn't fall over and hit me in the head. How many know what a triple is? Yep. 2 things you want to look for. We talked about making walls on 16-inch on center, right? There was a time in construction where they would do 12-inch on center with a double top plate, and that was a load-bearing wall. So if you open up your drywall and your house has got a weird roof line and you're not sure, but your studs are 12-inch on center, there's a really good chance that's a load-bearing wall, okay? Be really careful. If you come across a triple, this is the code minimum for point load, all right? It's 3 2x4 stacked together. So you might not see any floor joists that are interrupted. You might not see anything like that. I once did a renovation on a house, and I'm going to just show you a quick demonstration because we run into all kinds of different problems out there, all right? Problem number 1, half the homes in this country are built before building code. In Canada, we had a building code in 1941, but it was very minimal. It was designed to provide a very quick, repetitive way to build post-war housing when all the guys came back, okay? Our actual code didn't happen until 1980. In America, you guys got yours in 74. But everything before that, almost half the houses in the world don't have a building code. And so they had standards, but they didn't have a code. So here's what I had. I had a house. It's a great big square, okay? Upstairs, we had a big wall, beam, 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 all the way to the basement. But the roof line of this house went from here, like this, okay? And this point here looked something more like this. I had a wall, okay? Regular studs, no big surprise, no biggie. But in the ceiling up here, I had a block and a block and a block and a block, and then a post. Just random wood, okay? And then from here, I had 2x4s stretching over 20 feet to each of those corners carrying the roof line. This was a point load. You couldn't even see it right out of the gate. And what we did is we had a design, we wanted to get rid of this wall. So my engineer came up with a plan, and he built, his plan is we built the wall from here, and we brought out a beam to this point. And it was LVL with a steel plate, and we put holes in it, and an LVL on the other side so that we could put through bolts to tie all this together. And this beam, it extended out 4 feet. And back here, it went back another 6 feet. Okay? And then it kept up going to this roof the whole way with studs like this. That engineering was designed to provide the lift to counter effect the snow load on this point that we could carry back and send down here onto that structural wall. They had a triple at the end, okay? But it wasn't going as a triple all the way to the basement. Just because we have standard practices doesn't mean everybody followed them. And just because we have a code now and we have ways of doing things doesn't mean they were done that way back in the day. So if you're renovating older houses, get a structural engineer. Let them come take a look, pull all the drywall, lath, plaster, whatever off. Make sure they're looking at your whole frame, calculating live load and snow load, okay? Those are two distinctively different things depending on where you live. They'll have allowances, and then they'll go, hey, we usually get 4 feet, it weighs this much, and then they're going to double it. They're going to make you build your house for Armageddon. And do that. Follow the rules, okay? Stop sending me questions about how to engineer your build. Every house is unique, and every location's got a different requirement. So let the engineer in your neighborhood tell you how to fix your mess, all right? Now, there's one more thing. Load bearing. We went from point load to load bearing because that was a point load that we were dealing with. Now, load bearing walls, generally we build 12 inches on center, or we use 2x6. In a lot of cases, we're using 2x6 lumber because we use load bearing walls also for mechanical walls at the same time. And you can do that. Anytime you've got a ceiling joist that ends and then another ceiling joist that starts and they overlap each other and there's a wall underneath it, that's a load bearing wall. Does that make any sense? So your ceiling joist is coming 16 feet from one side and 16 feet from the other side, and they don't butt up against each other. They actually stick them next to each other and sit it on top of a beam, because we want to have something about 3.5 inches of overhang in case the house settles and shifts during earthquakes. It doesn't fall apart and collapse, okay? Like we really do build for when hell freezes over. So that's kind of the goal here, is to build smart so that in the event of a natural disaster or a tornado hits through your neighborhood and moves your house off its foundation, your house doesn't collapse on itself. It's important to follow these rules. Go get your spade bit. I left it up there in the ceiling. It was just a real quick, I'm going to get a ladder. I'm vertically challenged. What do you want? All right. Let's deal with some questions. If you've got some structural questions, I can help you out, steer you in the right direction so you understand what's going to happen when your building inspector or your engineer gets on site. And hey, the rain stopped. It sounds like we're out of the woods here. That's exciting. All right. Okay, Julian, question. Building an interior wall, do we cut into the existing ceiling drywall and run framing to joists? What if there are no joists to secure the top to that section? Joists are 24 inches apart. Okay. Yeah, here's the deal. You really want to find structure, okay? If you're putting in a non-load bearing wall, you can get away with structure every 3 to 4 feet. Okay, so if your ceiling is going this way with your framing and you're putting the wall in between the two and there's nothing there, get into the attic. I know it ain't sexy. Put some blocking in. Put some blocking in. Provide yourself something to screw to. Every 3 to 4 feet is fine, especially within a few inches where you have doors hanging, okay? There's a lot of force, especially on the hinge side. You want to make sure your wall is secured. If you use any kind of adhesives or glues or spray foams and try to stick that in place, it's all going to fail over time. And you're going to get cracks in all your drywall, which means you're back to fixing drywall, painting your ceilings again, and painting your wall because they're both affected. It's just not worth the aggravation. Put in some blocking and make sure it's going to last the long haul. Cheers. All right. Wow. Got to get my beverage. Here we go. And back up here. LK, how do you determine the length of lumber needed for the top and bottom plates? Is it better to stick to small sections, all 8-foot segments? Okay, you know, you can cheat like this, right? But let's talk about this. Maybe what I'll do is I'll actually draw this out. Here we go. Let me just go through a few pieces of paper. I'm going through this whole pad tonight probably, and that's okay. So we got an 8-foot section of wall, all right? And 8-foot sections wall start and finish with a stud. This is the challenge. And then you do another 8-foot section wall, let's say, next to each other. Let's say it's a basement, okay? Now, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those are your studs, and then you got a double. Now what do you do with your drywall? Because if you buy an 8-foot, you're fine. You do an 8-foot, and then you buy another 8-foot over here. You put in a sheet of drywall, right? Because framing is all about what comes next. You've got to think ahead. Now, what do you do up top? Oh, well, if I start on any of these studs, I end up in space because I've put an extra stud here. So I don't have a place for a good joint. Well, you can cheat. You could start your sheet here, all right? Come over here, and you could put in a piece of 2x4 to double up that stud because it's going to be offset 1.5 inches. Yeah, it's a lot of extra framing, but it's a basement. It's probably a thermal wall, which means you got insulation, vapor barrier, you know, all these things. You don't want to go backwards and cutting open your plastic. Here's what you do. When you're framing a basement, guys, buy 10-foot top and bottom plates. Okay? And here's why. I'll show you on the tape. This is what I do. This is my cheat. I'm going to open up to 9 feet, 10 feet. Here we go. Okay. 10 feet. Where's my red square? Right? 112 inches. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I got 8 inches left to the end of my stick. Okay? So you build a 10-foot wall. You go like this. You put all your studs in. And then you have 8 inches left. You lift that wall in place. Then you build your next wall section on the floor. Now, we have 14.5 inches between studs. That's the gap. We have 8. So here, what do? You measure off 6.5, and you put your first stud. Then you pull out your tape, okay? And you mark all your 16s on that wall. And then you lift it up, and when you piece it all together, you have a perfect 16-inch center, the entire length of the wall. I don't care if your basement's 100 feet long. 10-foot sections is the way to do it, okay? And that makes your framing perfect every single time. So now you can buy your 8s, 10s, 12s, you know, whatever length you can get, 16 maybe. But then every stud that's out there is 1.5 inches wide, and every joint lines up in the middle of a stud. So now you can stitch your drywall together on any stud in the room. And that's what you want. Makes your life simple so that you can frame, you can run your wiring, pass your electrical inspection, Insulate, vapor barrier if you need it. Remember where you live. Those are questions you need to ask me. Pass your rough-in inspection before they allow you to close. So your electrical, your plumbing, your framing, your thermal, and your vapor barrier is all done. Once you're allowed to close, every sheet you put up is a full sheet. You don't have to cut nothing until you get to the ends, okay? And that's how we do that. All right, next question. Half wall. How do we ensure the half wall won't move around if it's only attached at the floor and one other wall? Okay, that's a different kind of framing, but we're going to show you that right now. Half walls. Man, the bane of my existence. All right, let's just do this. We have got a floor. We're going to call it OSB. We're going to assume we don't have access to the framing underneath. We're going to build a 2x4 wall halfway up the wall. Okay? People want to know, how do you finish this off so it has stability? I want to put tile on it. I want to have an entrance to my shower. I'm going to put glass above it, whatever, right? Half walls. Here's the deal. 2x4, all right? Now, if you have the ability to put anchors on both sides, great. But let's say you don't. Let's say it goes into a stairwell. You can buy an anchor. It's a steel anchor, okay, that goes like this. And you can screw it to the OSB. You can screw it to your 2x4. Depending on your type of flooring you're going to go with, this problem right here becomes a major problem. So what you can do is, if your floor joists are going across it, you can take your oscillating tool and cut out some OSB and then recess it flush into your subfloor. Okay? If that's not an answer to you, though, then here's what you do. What you do is you take 3/4 inch plywood and you laminate this whole stud half wall. Okay? You take 3/4 ply and you cover the whole thing like a skin. All right? And you use screws every 12 inches all the way around and all the way across the bottom and all the way across the top plate. That makes that thing incredibly, incredibly sturdy, because your bottom plate, you're going to have structure. If you don't have structure, you got to build some, but it should be put in with like bolts into the floor joist underneath. So if the bottom plate isn't going to move and the top plate wants to, okay, see this? Here, let me just draw this. I know I have visual impairment issues with the size of this. But here and here, here's your wall. If this bottom plate will not move and you're trying to direct force that way, the distance from here to here is greater than the distance from here to here. And so that plywood then makes that wall resist movement, because all of those screws won't allow it to stretch. In order to move, things have to separate. It's a greater distance. So by adding that plywood before you drywall, makes that wall incredibly strong. That was a lot, but nothing. I got to do that whole video one day. All right. Are there any advantages to using metal studs / disadvantages? Yeah, the disadvantage is it's materials you're not used to working with. It's tools you're not used to working with. Local building stores don't carry a lot of the materials that you're going to need to do a whole installation. Like, they don't carry a lot of the right installations. They don't carry the right size grommets. Depending on the store, you might get lucky. The other thing is wood doesn't slice your hands and arms open, and metal does. So if you're not used to working with it, it can be kind of dangerous as a DIYer. I would recommend maybe trying to avoid metal. We actually promoted it for a little while because the price of wood went through the roof and metal made sense. In humid environments, even the galvanized steel that we're buying, it'll rust because it's not designed to be in a wet area. And the back of a basement wall can be a wet area. So we'll see, we'll get a flood, and we'll go in and we'll do a tear out of a flood. But they've had a flood before, but nobody tore it out. And it's just rusted for the bottom 8 to 10 inches. And the walls are just floating. Okay, so that's a problem. At least wood can dry out and still be structurally sound. All right, here we go. Dr. Digital. Hey, Jeff, is it better to build the walls on the cement floor or on top of the finished floor? And if on the cement, how would you manage water, especially if you're using those fancy subfloor panels? Okay, that's the question, right? Always, always, always subfloor first, walls on top. Subfloor, not your finished floor. Subfloor, okay? Add your finished flooring after the fact, but always build your walls on top of a subfloor if you can. The goal there is to get whatever moisture that you're separating yourself from in behind your wall up to your floor joist package where it can get to the outside so moisture can migrate out of your building. All right, here we go. Ralph wants to know, Ralph Hansen became a YouTube member. Well, cheers, Ralph. Welcome to the membership club, buddy. Hopefully you can make it January 13th at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. We're having a members-only show, live show, where I get to just hang out and chat with you guys. We want to be able to help you out a little more in depth. Some of these answers are a little in depth, but during the live show, we can pretty much do surgery on your home. Ashley wants to know, you're in Spokane, Washington, 1969 home. Here we go. So here we go. Post building construction. Post really a whole lot of wisdom. We were still building things weird and everybody's experimenting back then. Long center basement wall is framed onto 1 to 2 inches of raised concrete. How to attach new wall and subfloor system. All right. Actually, this is normal. Back in the day, and we still use it today, we use footings. For anything that's structural in a basement, we still use footings. And so if it's a point load, we'll use a 2 by 2 foot box, usually 8 inches deep with rebar in it, and we dig it out. Back in the old days, no one intended to ever finish the basement because they didn't have building science to make those spaces livable for most construction because they couldn't waterproof. They didn't have vapor barriers around the concrete. So what they did is they poured the foundation wall, all right, and your structural load-bearing wall at the same time, and they didn't dig down to reset so it would be underneath the finished pour. You'd see a lot of old houses, they'll have round posts or square posts that are a lot bigger than the post that it's sitting on, sticking up out of the concrete. That's because they put the footings in and then they added the concrete floor later, and the footings were usually not dug out, so they were raised above your surface. That's what you're dealing with. The best thing you can do in that scenario is leave it there, build on top of it, put some sort of a moisture barrier in between your concrete and your wood, and buy your lumber wide enough that it covers it all up so that your finishing looks like a modern house. So if you have a 6-inch or an 8-inch wide, use that width of a lumber and cover it all up so your finished drywall comes all the way down and doesn't contact that masonry, okay? Because that concrete is going to have high levels of moisture. It'll transfer into your drywall. So you want to make sure that you frame wide enough that you can isolate that and not have direct contact. All right? Cheers. And don't be afraid to spray paint it with an oil-based paint just to lock that moisture in. That's another good thing. All right. Let's get on to another question here. Chris. Hey, Chris. Member of the channel. Very old building, pre-1900. Concrete floor slopes 2 inches per 14 feet. How to frame and should the floor be done first? Might be vinyl or subfloor or sills in the concrete. Yeah, here's the thing. That age of a house, you know you're going to have moisture issues. If you're planning on leveling that out and pouring concrete, 2 inches over 14 feet is a good chunk of concrete. I would suggest you do a concrete and you fill it in, and then you pour a leveler on top, just for the finishing work, okay? Unless you're gonna add 4 inches of concrete to the whole basement in the middle and 2 inches on the outside. It's hard to get that. But at that age of a house, there's not a lot of headroom, right? In a lot of cases. So if you got the headroom and you can build it up and level it out, great. Do the leveling first, and then start from there and then put all of your subfloor and walls on top of all that. Vinyl is not a solution when you have that kind of a slope because it's a greater slope than what the product allows. Make sure when you buy your flooring, guys, you check into the specs, dig in deep. They don't want to show this to you up front, but vinyl has a limitation to be installed on uneven surfaces. It does not stretch, right? It's not tongue and groove like hardwood where you can have little gaps open up and nobody's going to be too upset. Vinyl locks together or it doesn't. And if your uneven surface is greater than what the product allows, it won't lock together and stay there. It'll kind of lock, but it'll open up over time as people walk on it. You'll be very disappointed with your installation. Vinyl plank is not a solution on uneven floors. Vinyl sheet goods are, but not vinyl plank. All right? So be careful. All righty. Let's go. Whoa, Mark G. Throwing a little love there. Cheers, Mark. Appreciate it, buddy. Glad I'm not the only one who laughs at themselves. You better. It's either laugh or cry, huh? Oh, my goodness. Listen, I make a living on this channel sharing everything that I've learned. And I continue to do new challenges like the double wide trailer down here, like the next house we're going to do. I like to constantly be learning. As long as I'm learning, I've got more to offer. right? So that's my goal, to constantly be getting better and offering more and more information and trying to at least minimize the learning curve, because the learning curve in construction is you screw up, you find out what you screwed up, and then you find out why and how, and then you make sure you never do that again. That's how we all learn. It's painful, especially for a consumer. And most guys don't sit under tutelage long enough to learn about making mistakes and how to avoid them. They learn the systems and how everything goes well, and then they take off and run a business. And they're not around for the phone calls and the headaches and the callbacks and the insurance claims, and they never really learn about all the things that they've done wrong. And they'll learn the hard way. Pink Sniper 28 has got a question, member of the channel. Cheers to you. Have a wall that I want to waterproof the bottom so water can't pass below it. How can I do this? All right, Pink Sniper, that is a very vague description of a problem. I need to know, first of all, is it interior, exterior? If it's exterior, what weather climate, what's the geography? Is it going to be a wet area? Is it a basement? Is it a shower? A lot of information there we're going to have to get. If you get a chance, jump into the January 13th show. It's going to run from 2 to 4, maybe 2 to 5, depending on if everybody gets their questions answered. All right. I just can't really dive into all of that right now. Let's try to keep all of this as close to framing as possible. Jesse says his next project is a 4x10 shower. Want it to be curbless. Should I go with 2 pre-sloped Schluter, or could I get enough slope with 1 and thin set the rest of the floor pan? It doesn't cover 3 feet. Okay, so Schluter makes a shower pan, single slope, 5 feet by 5 feet. Okay, and so buy that one. And if you want to go curbless, put the drain at the entrance to your shower. 5 feet long. If you want to go curbless. And then you can put a glass panel in front of it, have the shower on one side and the entrance on the other, right? And the whole slope can go rise up into the back of the shower away from the drain. It's okay if the water heads towards the drain. And that's the easiest way to do curbless. That doesn't affect your framing and your structure. You don't need engineers. You can just remove all your subfloor, put the drain where the door is going to be, put the glass in front of the drain, and then your slope goes into the wet room. That is the best way to do it. But buy the 5x5. And if it's bigger than 5 going backwards, yes, you can definitely pack it up with thin set or dry pack, and you can continue to create that slope. Just make sure you get your Curdy membrane to cover all of that, okay? By all your inside corners and stuff, and you'll be just fine. Commodore Kodiak 97, I'm planning to finish my garage this year. 2 questions. Bottom plate of the walls has some old rot damage, but appears solid now, but does get wet. Replace or keep? Is blocking required on walls? Okay, so first of all, if you have old water damage on a garage bottom plate and it still gets wet on occasion, what you've got here is probably a situation where you either are on a slope ground or you're too close to the level of the ground and you get high rains and then that water gets in, or your concrete gets wet in extreme weather and then it passes into and then it dries out. That's what wood is supposed to do. But if it starts to rot, it loses integrity, okay? So do not do anything like spray seal it because it needs access to the air to dry. If you want to leave it there, the best advice I can give is don't invest in finishing that garage any more money than you would spend for something that'll last another 15 to 20 years tops. If you want to get more than 20 years out of it, then cut all those bottom plates out, put in pressure treated lumber, okay? And you could do that. You can actually cut all of that, right? What I do when I'm in that situation, let's say this is the garage wall, okay? I take a piece of wood like this, like my temporary wall, I'll put it all along in front, and I'll throw nails in it. So now every one of these studs, the load transfers into this wood to the neighboring studs, okay? And then you can take your reciprocator, you can cut the nails off the bottom of the stud, you can cut a section of your plate out, and you can replace it with an 18 or 20-inch piece of pressure-treated lumber. Stick it in, right? Go to the next one. Go to the next one. Or if you put an 8-foot piece on, do 2 studs at a time. Change out 24 inches at a time. But as long as there's wood underneath the stud where it touches the concrete, you've got your load transfer. So you can do it in sections, all right? Just put in a temporary wall This will transfer load to do 1 or 2 studs at a time, and then that's how you can get that done. I would change the plate before I go invest any more money, so I know I'm getting 20 to 50 years. Do I have to remove ceiling drywall if adding a new interior wall? No, what you have to do is you have to identify where the framing and the ceiling is so you can attach it, okay? So there's 2 options here. Let's just do this. We'll get ourselves a new piece of paper. All right. Interior walls come in 2 categories, really long or short. So if we have a wall here and we have a wall here and we want to fill this space with a wall, we got top plate, we got bottom plate, we got our studs, all right? And you don't have anywhere up here to attach your framing. You can do it on the bottom. You can do it on the sides. You got a wall. Okay, so you can open up the sides, you can put in blocking if you need to and attach it on up and down the sides. If the top of this is not attached and it's less than 6 feet, I say screwing at the top and both sides of that is fine. Okay? But if a wall is any longer than that, you got to get into the attic or something. You got to find wood somewhere. Add blocking in the attic if you have to. Open up the drywall if you have to. I find it easier to go in the attic because you don't have to disturb the drywall in the ceiling. And if it's the only time you're going to disturb the drywall in the ceiling, don't do it. It's a lot of work, patching and then painting the whole ceiling that's affected to it. All right? Well, that's how I like to work. I would rather crawl up in the attic first thing in the morning, even in the summertime. It's nice and cool up there. Take 5 minutes. Go up there with a portable skill saw like this, okay, and a piece of 2-foot lumber. All right? Eyeball it, measure it, cut it, stick it in place, a couple of quick screws, boom. Back downstairs, you know exactly where to attach your wall to. Okay? Get yourself something to stiffen it up. Especially if that wall's going to have a door. If it has a door, you got to go put blocking in. If it doesn't have a door, you can get away with up to 6 feet without attaching it to the ceiling. You can use PL Premium Construction Adhesive and you'll be okay. Tyson wants to know, hey Jeff, I got a 28 by 16 2-story, built in 1916, rough framed, oak. Got it. It's a 2-bed, 1-bath. On the 2nd story, I want to open the ceiling. Do we need extra bracing or reinforce the 2x4 rafters? Yes. Here's the thing, Tyson, great question. I'm going to pull up my whiteboard again. Okay. Because back in those days, here's how they framed your ceiling. I'm going to get into the frame. Here we go. Here's how they frame the ceiling. You got a wall, and you got a wall. And here's the floor. And then here's your roof. Okay? And then up here they have a ridge beam. They'd have a beam spanning the whole distance. And they attached all their lumber across the side. All right? Now, all of these things built in that age almost is always northeastern, right? Am I right? You're probably in the northeast. Here's the deal. They didn't attach wood from the corner across. It was too long a span. So what they did is they attached it here. Okay? And that is not a truss. This is called a collar tie. All right? And they would put nail in there, and they put nail in, usually 2. What happens is all that snow has downward pressure. Okay? And when it really loads up, all that downward pressure, if this collar tie wasn't there, the distance from here to here, this would start to flatten out. And then your walls would push out. And on really old houses, you'll put a level on those walls. They've all pushed out a little bit. The collar tie is the only thing holding that house together. All of this, from the 2nd floor all the way up the whole roof, this whole thing would collapse on itself without collar ties. So if you want to vault the ceiling, you get a structural engineer. And what they're going to do is they're going to engineer a metal bracket that goes up here, that replaces the need for a collar tie that goes into your frame. Okay? Or they're going to engineer something that happens only 2 feet from the ceiling that provides that same level of strength. And it's a lot. You're talking steel here, okay? This is not a wood fix. Whenever you move that collar tie up to the top, it's like the further you go, it's like being on a diving board. The further you go, the more it bends, okay? So there is structure technology out there to replace collar ties with metal brackets. And then you can have a vaulted ceiling. You can spray foam that scenario. If you want to go to a metal roof, that's fine. But get yourself a structural engineer. Don't try to figure that out on your own. Okay? All right. Wow. There we go. We're an hour in. Let's take 2 more quick questions because Eric back in Ottawa has got some important stuff to do tonight. I can't drag this out forever. And if I don't get to your question, guys, join membership. See you January 13th. All right. Just joined you. Love your videos so much. Live in Wisconsin, so it's pretty cold in winter. Yep. What is the best insulation for walls? I'm finishing my basement with drywall. Thanks in advance. Any insulation has the same R value. If your house is older, mineral wool is a better option because older houses have a lot of weakness when it comes to infestation with mice and that sort of thing. Okay, so then your mineral wool is a really good option. They don't like eating that crap. They won't live in your walls. If you have a nice sealed up house, then the best insulation I find is rigid foam. Create a thermal break. Then you frame in front of it. And all of this is done on top of a subfloor. Okay, best case scenario. If you don't do a subfloor, do rigid foam, wall in front of it, pressure treated bottom plate, or at least some sort of a moisture barrier. Especially, I don't know how old your house is by the question, but join us next Saturday. I can ask you all these questions, okay? We can dive deep because building science is not one size fits all right? You never just go on Amazon and say, ooh, I love that shirt, I want to buy it. They want to know what size it is, right? Your house has got some issues with where it is, when it was, and all that kind of jazz. We're going to dive into that. Join me on the 13th. We can have a conversation in the chat. Cheers, buddy. All right, Patrick, going to DIY finish new build walkout basement, 3,000 square feet. Yeah, that's a nice problem to have, eh? 3,000 square feet of finished basement. Is subfloor really needed? I know about pressure treated for framing. Curious about subfloor. Okay, so here's the deal. There are a whole list of things that can go wrong on your house. You can have water come through a cold joint from the wall to your foundation footing. You can have a hot water tank blow up in the middle of the night and no one even knows about it, and it gushes out 5 gallons a minute of water into your basement. You can have an older house with a driveway and windows that are right at the driveway level, and heavy rains, the water comes in and goes underneath your windowsill, which isn't covered by insurance, down the wall, and then fill up your basement full of water. There's so many things that can go on. What subfloors do is they take all of the not traumatic problems and they mitigate them all by creating an airspace underneath your house where any moisture that gets in for ridiculous, stupid reasons is instantly mitigated because wet moves to dry. And under your floor is air. If water gets in there, that air should be connected to an airspace up your walls, which connects to the framing of the floor joist cavity, which connects to outside. And so there's a pathway for the moisture to leave. High humidity goes to low humidity, all right? Wet goes to dry. And so what subfloor does is it gives you an isolation, a break from the trouble of life to give you the confidence to invest in doing a beautiful job in your basement. Now, if you want short and sweet and simple, vinyl on the concrete, no worry. Stick up your walls, get yourself a good thermal break, do an R20 2x6 frame. I'm all good with any of that. But if you want to do something nice, some built-ins and maybe a kitchenette and all this kind of stuff and hardwood floors, and you can have a really beautiful basement. But if you don't want to put that money into it, unless you start with something that protects the investment. That's all I'm going to say on that matter. If you want to learn more, you can watch our basement video series, guys. Listen, this has been great. We are going to do this again next week. Next week, we're talking drywall, installation, damage, repairs, how to tackle all those issues, all in one live show. So that you can ask all your questions. We can show you some tips and tricks and help you out. It's our Master Remodeling Series live here on YouTube. Thanks for joining us. And if you're not a member yet, consider becoming one. The benefits are insane. We've got a brand new membership program going to be starting in the next few months. We're just kind of working out all the bugs and kinks. We're excited. 2024 is going to be the best channel year ever. We're just getting started. Our team is in place. We've got huge plans. I can't wait to share them all with you. Thanks for taking time to join us today. Hopefully this was helpful. If you got questions that weren't answered, put them in the comment sections on this video in the next 5 minutes or so when it comes out live on YouTube. All right? Cheers to next time.